Hi everyone, I hope it's breaking. So today we'll basically be making a basic web scraping application using Node.js, and we'll be scraping a news website called Axios.com. So right here I have some tabs open. So this is Axios, it's a news website, and let me just switch to it. So we'll basically be scraping some useful information from this news website, and obviously you could replace it with CNN or BuzzFeed or any other website um, that you might be interested in getting useful information out of. So first, what I like to do is make a little to-do list out of what we'll be taking on, and this could be thought of as the agenda for this little live stream. So we'll be making a web scraping script basically using Node.js. So first we're going to try and get the environment set up, and I'll show you what I have and what you'll need. Next we'll need to go get some helpful Node modules, and I'll talk about osmosis in a little bit. Next, I've outlined some data that we'll be looking into basically trying to get from the Axios.com website. We'll try to get the title of the um, web pages, along with hopefully we could figure out how to get things like the image. So the title would be basically, this stuff. The image would be this image or this one. I guess the news cycle is pretty consistent. It would be getting this image and seeing, hopefully maybe we can figure out how to get the summary, right? So summary might be some of the text that's right here that's before the little read more button that we have going on, and then hopefully print it out in some helpful JSON format. And my Twitter is right here in case you want to shout me out or talk to me or something like that. So that's what we have going on. So let's make this a little bigger, and let me pull up iTerm. So I am already in my folder called tutorials, and basically I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder. Let's call it Axios Scraper. So let's go in there. Cool. So people have made basically libraries that will make scraping some of this data a little bit faster, so we don't have to do the fetch requesting from HTTP all from ground zero. Generally speaking, I've noticed a trend of people leaning towards Python when they do this kind of web scraping stuff. So I thought I would see why or how to go about solving this problem using Node and JavaScript specifically. So one of the first Google results that comes up is this module called Osmosis, made by this guy right here. And so it seems to be able to do what we are already trying to do. One thing I noticed while going through the documentation is that it doesn't really outline too many of the API calls specifically. So we have the features right here. We have an example, which is going to end up being quite useful to us. And so we do have a documentation link. So if you actually click on the documentation link right here, yeah, so it doesn't have the most user-friendly documentation, but that example that's on this page will be quite useful. So we can come here and click on this npm page, and it's going to open this up right here. I had it already open. So we can get started by doing the install command. But before we run install, let's just go ahead and do a quick npm init, and this will just initialize our folder to some npm specific stuff so that we can run npm init in a second. And yeah, let's just call it Axios Scraper. Version 1 is fine. We'll just keep all the stuff as is, and that looks okay to me. So now if we list it, there should be a package.json which should have all the stuff we need. Now let's go back here, and I've copied this npm install command, and I've pasted it here, and I'm going to go ahead and add the save flag, which will basically add it into the package.json. So we go ahead and run that. It'll take a second, so it's going to go and do some npm related magic, and hopefully try and fetch that. So while that's happening, let me see. All right, cool. This is my first stream, so no one's on the chat right now, but there will be people soon, hopefully. So it seems to be a fairly large tree of dependencies that this osmosis relies on. And we can see that it's downloaded quite a good amount of stuff. There might be some lighter weight dependencies that are able to do this kind of things out there. It's certainly worth looking into, and probably in a later video, but this is like I mentioned, the first one that seems to come up. It might be a popular one. So if we list what's in our directory now, we have the package.json and the Node modules, which is where all our stuff has been installed. Yeah, that's a good amount of packages that it seems to get. All right, so now let's go ahead and create a scrape.js. You could call this anything, but actually before that, let's just, what I like to do sometimes is just play around with just on the Node REPL, I guess you could call it, and play around with experimenting with the library that I might have downloaded and trying and just seeing, is it working, how does it work, what functions do I have access to. So first, let's go ahead and declare osmosis to be osmosis. Gotta make sure I don't spell it. Okay, so there we go. So this is a really helpful way of taking a look at the functions that we have been provided thanks to installing osmosis. So now this is way more helpful to me than the documentation here. See, I mean, I don't really know. We have some sort of callback, and we have a middleware and next. It's not really as helpful as being able to take a peek at some of these functions, and some of them are named something that is pretty self-explanatory. So we have access to the osmosis function as it's described in the constant variable here, osmosis, and we've required it. So let's see if we can basically go about creating a new file and hopefully being able to scrape some useful content. So we're just going to create the scrape.js, and I'm going to go ahead and go in there. So let's begin by once again declaring the osmosis as we required it. Cool. And from that point, let's just declare the website that we are going to be scraping off of Axios as its own little variable. So we'll come back here and I'll just copy this, and obviously you could change this for any other website that you are trying to get useful content out of. And let's just see if that stuff works. So let's just print out something like scraping and website and that, and let's go ahead and save that and exit out. Node scrape.js. It should not really do anything. Yeah, so at least we don't have like a killer error at that point, you know. So what I'm going to do here is actually split the shell horizontally using current profile. So we'll basically be able to run our stuff down here, and this is just something I like to do, and then we'll be able to write our program up here and run it down here. So let me just make the font bigger, and let's go into basically our folder. And my fans are being super loud, but hopefully you guys can hear me all right. And okay, so now we basically have two. That gives us the advantage of being able to come over here, and I could have Vim open here, and then here I could do scrape.js, and so it works. One thing I like to do, and I would really recommend you guys get, is it's called NodeMon. You could get it by doing npm install g for the global flag nodemon. I already have it installed, but what this basically allows you to do is it watches your directory that you run it in to see when your file changes, and so you don't have to repeatedly keep closing node and then running it again and then closing it. So here's what I mean by that. So we could just do nodemon scrape.js, unlike the node scrape.js, which I had just run earlier. So we go ahead and run this, and we should expect basically the same thing to go down. So it says watching, and so here's the response that we expected. Now, but the cool thing is that we could do sort of like updates to this. Still scraping, and as soon as I save it, it's gonna right here still scraping. So we don't have to basically restart the whole thing, and it's better for faster development. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Cool. Okay, so the next thing we want to take a crack at is basically getting some kind of useful content figured out from Axios. So if you come back here to the Osmosis GitHub page, it looks like the first thing we need to do is just use get on the website. And we already have the Osmosis instance here. So we're basically going to do Osmo. Let's see what happens if we declare Axios as, and then you can just pass in the website here. And let's go ahead and let's see what that does, right? Let's see what kind of stuff is within that object. So it looks like we have some JSON in there, but it's not really helpful because it's more like a JavaScript function. So if we go back to the setup, it looks like now is when the web scraping part will start. So I'll show you some techniques that I've come across and learned over having done this a few times, where we basically need to look for the useful information, right? So if you come back to our little list that I had made, so we've gotten the environment set up, we've gotten our node module, so we need to figure out what to escape, right? So we need to figure out how to get the title. Now, if you know anything about HTML, you know that everything has sort of a unique class and tag that's associated with it. So I'm using a Firefox Developer Edition, but you could do this in Google Chrome or whatever. I'm just basically going to bring up the developer tools. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. And so this inspect thing is going to be really helpful now. So basically, we're going to want to inspect it. There's this little square with the mouse icon, and I can go ahead and inspect this and click on it. And if I come back here, so it's actually, let me make the text a little bigger and pull this down. So it seems to have focused in on that title, right? Trump blasts John McCain, and so that's what it has picked up on and brought to the attention of this inspect window. So now we're going to want to focus in on what these sort of classes are and things like that. Well, one thing we have to kind of keep in mind, and one mistake that I see people frequently making, is that they're going to try and want to pick out this H2, this line of widget _ headline and then custom post headline. Now that's going to be a mistake, because you have to think of Java HTML as like a tree, right? So this H2 tag is within a larger div item. In this case, it's widget head, and so you can see when I scroll over widget head, we can kind of see the whole post get highlighted behind, and so we're going to want to think of these sort of articles in a hierarchy. And so if we just start picking out the H2s, then we kind of lose reference of where we are in the HTML DOM tree, basically. So what I like to do is I like to come sort of, I know that the H2 is going to be here, and we can do some future thinking. So if I hover over the widget image container, we can see that it's getting to that image, so we're there. And so if we had made the accident of trying to capture this h2 element, it would have been difficult for us to then kind of reference that image container. And this will all make sense when we start getting a little bit more into the code. So now that we've found our h2, let's go ahead and go one DOM tree element above as its reference. So in this case, that's going to be, everything else is on the same hierarchy, and then we come here, and then it's div class widget head. And so let me just go ahead and copy that and come back to our thing. So let's go ahead and delete this line. And so let's go ahead and insert a heading location, and let's just declare our div there. So that dot notation basically means div class name. It will be familiar to you. It's kind of what's used in JavaScript. So the same kind of notation is being used there. And this widget head basically contains, every widget head contains, the h2, it contains the image, the body of the paragraph text for the description, and then the next widget head contains the next articles, h2, and so on. So we have a reference to that basically. And maybe add some comment. So we have declared that. Next, let's go ahead and try to figure out how to get some useful content from Axios, right? So this is when we can go back to that example, and looks like we can just run find commands on specific divs, right? It looks like here it's looking for the h1 div and so on. So let's basically go ahead and yeah, so you have to remember that Osmosis is declared as the library, and then Axios is declared as the Osmosis getting our website, in this case axios.com. So it's basically these two commands is what Axios, our constant variable, consists of. So we can basically run something like axios.find, and we'll be passing in the heading location. And then let's go ahead and let's see if we can just print out some helpful data at that point, right? Looks like there's a data function, so let's just see what happens. So let's go ahead and declare a data function. It seems to want something called a listing, which seems to be probably the data. And so just for lack of confusion, I'll just call it D. And looks like it's a callback there. And let's just go ahead and console.log the data. So, it's good to be experimenting with this kind of thing and see what kind of errors go wrong and that sort of stuff. Okay, so looks like heading location. Have I spelled everything right? Heading location and heading forgot an equal sign. You guys were probably yelling at me when I was typing that in the live stream. So let's save that and see how NodeMon does. Okay, so something happened, but it wasn't really helpful. So it looks like it just dumped out a bunch of empty JSON objects, right? But notice how there's some sort of number of them. In this case, I think it's like 12 of them and 13 of them. It just kind of dumped out. So let's figure out how to get some actual useful data out of this this JSON, right? Because I think that if we come back here, it looks like there's something called a set function, which seems to be setting, title, description, which looks like kind of exactly what we want to do. So we want to basically set, the title in this case to the heading that we seem to be pulling. So let's go here and let's insert a new line, and it looks like we can set, and we'll pass in an object here, title, right? That's what we want to get. That's what we've been focused on. And so as for the second parameter, so this is where what I was talking about comes in handy. Why we want to think of HTML as a tree, because basically, and I know it's really poorly documented here, but the fact that we have declared sort of our uppermost definition of an article, in this case it was widget head, which contains all the useful elements, we can just assume that we are already in the widget head. And then in order to get our title, we're going to basically want to go to this h2. Now is when that widget headline stuff is going to basically come in handy. So I can go ahead and copy this, and I think one should be good enough. So we're going to copy the headline and go ahead and insert it here, and once again using that same sort of format that you guys are hopefully familiar with. So that should look good. Let's go ahead and give that a save and see what goes wrong. Oh, well, you look at that. Let me just scroll this up. So looks like it seems to have gotten all the titles, and with really little effort. One thing that stands out to me is that it looks like there's an empty JSON node that seems to be getting returned, and these are kind of things that you will come across and problems that you will have, because people's HTML websites aren't perfect, and so to be trying scraping them and expect perfect handleable responses is asking too much, especially with modern applications and web apps and the way they work. You have to do some kind of filtration by yourself. So it would be pretty easy to filter out and say, hey, if there is no title, let's just ignore it, right? It doesn't matter. And so that's when we could kind of get rid of this case. Great, so we have a title, and if we go back to Axios and look at the website, it looks like it should match up if I align it correctly. So it looks like this is the second headline, and after we strip over the advertisement, that's the second headline, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So the fourth one should be the Facebook one. There we go. We got our boy Mark Zuck in the building, and okay, cool, right on. So we've been able to get the title pretty easily. And one thing you have to do is you have to play around with and break things, and this kind of environment being set up in a way that lets you kind of debug things really fast is super helpful. And okay, cool, right on. All right, okay. So next, let's try and figure out how to get the images, right? So let's see, how would we go about getting this image tag? One thing that at least I can't do is I can't drag this image anywhere. So it looks like they're not, they're doing something that doesn't allow users to kind of drag their images, or yeah, I can't even see the image source. So there's something going on there. Now, once again, we're going to come over to our little inspector and click on this inspect element, and let's go ahead and click on the image and go back to this. So it has brought to our attention the div called widget underscore image. It's an image class also. And so this is where we can kind of see they aren't just using an image tag, right? They're using a style that declares a background image with a URL. And what we want is basically a way to figure out how to grab this style's JPEG. So if I open that over here in a new tab and give it a second, so this is the image. So this is exactly what we want to be able to get. So if you take a look at the example, it looks like we can figure out how to get specific element sort of attributes without getting the inside of their bodies by doing the @ symbol. So it looks like you can get the image source by doing @source. So I hypothesized that we could use the @ style to get the entire style And then we could figure out how to synthesize the text so that we can remove the background image CSS property and filter out the specific URL for the JPEG. So we are back here, and let's scroll down a little, and it looks like we have to declare more of the data within set, right? Because we're already in that DOM tree, so we can just go ahead and sort of come in here and let's just do an image, right? Oh, caps lock. Image, and so if we go over here once again, let me just see what it was called. It's called the image, widget underscore image, right? Because that is the stuff we need. And we can declare it with like that. So let's test this out. Let's see what happens there. And this is the sort of, right? So we're getting nothing for the images. It seems to be finding, this is the problem that we just mentioned, that they aren't using normal image tags, so we can't just easily get it. But like I mentioned, we could use the @ and then reference the style, because if we come over here, it's actually in the style HTML div attribute, and that's where the sort of background image has been placed. And then we're going to go ahead and save that. Okay, so look, background image equals blah blah blah, and we have a URL right there. So if you go to Mark Zuckerberg's story and Facebook Fools on stock, and then right after that we have the image URL, and then it goes on. So if we copy this and come over here and actually open a new tab and paste what we were able to get, give it a second, and there we go. So we've been able to successfully get the title, we've been able to get the image, and we're able to print it out in a helpful JSON object. So you could do some stuff where you could basically print all this data out using the Node file system. But a really easy thing that you could do is just, if we go ahead and end nodemon here, we can just run node scrape.js and just output it, right, as an output.json, and do that. And then if we go to take a look at that, that's all our JSON. Like I said, we can't expect it to be perfect because websites aren't perfect, but we have it in a form that is really digestible, right? So you could basically write a routine that basically takes out this portion of the image and then removes the last closing parentheses, and then you would have a working image. And then you could basically make it so that you ignore, new characters and sort of large lines like that. So there we have it. Now, as a little assignment, try and figure out how to get the body summary, which is basically going to be, if you go over here and we try and inspect the element and come back here, so this p tag. So it looks like it's somewhere in the widget brief. There are a bunch of p tags that seem to contain little descriptions. So see if you can challenge yourself in figuring out how to go about getting that sort of brief summary for these articles. All right, and I could be found on my Twitter page. And thanks for hopefully watching the stream, and I really appreciate it.